Hello, I'm Tony Robinson, and I want to welcome you to my Romans Podcast Miniseries. I'm going to do about 9 short podcasts, and I'm trying to keep them to 15 minutes. We'll see what happens on what does under law mean in Romans 6:14. Remember when Paul said, for sin shall not have dominion over you, for you are not under law, but under grace. We want to know, what does that mean? And so I'm going to use the cat in the hat calculatus eliminatus paradigm. He said that whenever you want to find out where something is, you must first find out where it's not. And so what I'm going to do is in the first 8 teachings, I'm going to present to you 8 different interpretations from scholarship, from theological journals, 8 different views that are promoted. And of course, I don't agree with those, and I'll tell you why I don't agree with them. But we'll look at the ones that I don't agree with first, and then we'll get to mine. We'll get to mine a little bit later on. So let's get into it. So under law does not mean under condemnation. Okay. So here we go. Romans 6:14. For sin shall not have dominion over you, for you are not under law, but under grace, is one of the most misinterpreted and misunderstood verses in the New Testament. There is like zero scholarly consensus on its proper interpretation. Of course, when you get into biblical scholarship and you get into the papers that are written and the talks that are given, pretty much none of them agree with each other on any subject anyway. But this is definitely one of those areas where it is just wide open. There are so many reasons that are given for what under law means. And so since there are so many reasons, and all of those reasons are very divergent, they're very different from each other. And so obviously they can't all be right. So anyway, it's a fertile ground. Let's just put it that way. So many different interpretations. However, one thing that's common in most of them is that they converge to mean that we are no longer under the law of Moses as a normative standard or as a standard of righteousness. You've heard it. We're not under the law. So most of them come to that final conclusion. So in this podcast miniseries, as I said, we're going to look at some of the scholarly readings of Romans 6:14. And I'm going to demonstrate how they fail to adequately account for Paul's arguments in Romans chapter 5, verses 8. And then lastly, we're going to explore my reading of it. So let's look at this. Some read Paul as saying, for you are not under condemnation. So in other words, some scholars teach that under law means under condemnation. Okay. And so we want to look at that. So what is meant by under condemnation? Well, if you look through the scholarly articles, you'll find out that many of them believe that under condemnation means to be subject to the curse of the law because of our failure to keep the law, 100% of the law all of the time. And so this condemnation is what's known as a forensic reading. Okay, a forensic reading. This point of view is was promoted by John Calvin, and now by John Murray, C.E.B. Cranfield, John Stott. Those are some of the theologians that have espoused this view. So I want to give you, I think today I'm going to give you 4 reasons why under law in Romans 6:14 cannot mean under condemnation. And here's reason number 1. Paul already knows exactly how to say we are not under condemnation when he wants to. Okay. So, right. Hopefully that makes sense. Paul knows how to say we're not under condemnation. So, for instance, in Romans 5:18, when he's talking about man's fall into sin, Paul said in Romans 5:18, therefore, as through one man's offense, judgment came to all men, resulting in condemnation. So in other words, Paul knows how to say, we're all condemned. Okay, so that's Romans 5:18. Well, by the same token, he knows how to say we're not under condemnation. So if we go to Romans 8:1a, Paul literally says, there is therefore now no condemnation to those who are in Messiah Yeshua. So in other words, he knows how to say we're not under condemnation, right? So why would Paul use the phrase under law to mean under condemnation when he wants to say that we're not under condemnation? Okay, so this is the first reason why. Also, why would he say it twice? Once clearly, Romans 8:1a, there is therefore now no condemnation, and then once using a phrase that has no connection to condemnation. So, for instance, under law, how would what is there that would cause you to think that under law means under condemnation? Okay, so anyway, the first reason why is because Paul knows how to say we're not under condemnation, and he did say it. So that's the first reason why it doesn't mean, under law doesn't mean under condemnation. Here's reason number two. Within the context, and this is something I'm going to do with all of these different scholarly views, because this is very important. Within the context of Romans 5-8, does Paul hinge any of his arguments upon being under condemnation? Okay, so in other words, whatever under law means, the immediate context should lend some credence to whatever you say it means. Okay, so what I'm saying is in Romans 5-8, does Paul talk about condemnation at all? And the answer is yes. And this is good because at least this view right here, is looking at the context where he does mention condemnation, because many of the other views, the meaning that's given for under law is there's nothing in the text in Romans 5-8 that even hints at some of the other views. So this is a positive. At least the text does talk about condemnation, but so it does in Romans 5 and then 8. However, as I noted already, Paul knows how to say, therefore, that there is no condemnation. But what I would say is within the confines of Romans 5:20 through 7:25, it's pretty obvious that Paul's argument does not pertain to condemnation, and therefore under law does not mean under condemnation. And what I'm getting at here is that yes, Romans 5:18 he mentions condemnation coming into the world, and Romans 8:1 he mentions how we're no longer under condemnation. But in that section, Romans 5:20 to 7:25 and Romans 6:14 is right in the middle. In there, he doesn't talk about condemnation, and that is the main part of his text. In Romans 5:18, he's introducing the problem. He's saying, hey, we're under condemnation. But in Romans 5:20 through 7:25, that's when he deals with the problem of sin and Adonai's solution to it. And Romans 8 is more of a summary in saying, okay, as a result of Adonai solving this problem, this is the lay of the land now. So, but again, Paul knows how to say we're not under condemnation when he wants to. So within the context of Romans 5-8, does Paul use any language that would lead us to understand that under law should be interpreted as under condemnation? Okay, so still here on reason number two. So within Romans 5-8, does he use any language that would lead us to understand that under law means under condemnation? And because obviously under law means something, right? And it must be interpreted, right? Obviously, we must supply a meaning or a reading to under the law. And so my question is this: is there anything in the text that would suggest that under law should be interpreted as under condemnation? And again, my answer is no, that it's not. Okay, reason number three. Paul uses under law huponomon in other places that cannot possibly mean under condemnation, right? So if under law means under condemnation, then we should be able to, it should work in most contexts. So Galatians 4:4, But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his son, born of a woman, born under the law. Okay, well, let's change that. But in the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his son, born of a woman, born under condemnation. I don't think so. How about 1 Corinthians 9:20? And to the Jews, I'm going to read it with the condemnation reading. And to the Jews I became as a Jew, that I might win Jews. To those who were under condemnation, as under condemnation, that I might win those who are under condemnation. And again, I have trouble with that. I have trouble with that, thinking that those words mean under condemnation in that context. And here I'm going to give you my final reason, and this is going to be the number one test right here. I mean, I've already given you 3 other reasons why under law doesn't mean under condemnation, but for every scholarly view, we're going to run them through the "for sin shall not have dominion over you" test. Listen to this. Make sure you understand this. Every view, the last thing I'm going to do is take it through the "for sin shall not have dominion over you" test. So what is the "for sin shall not have dominion over you" test? Well, let's look at Romans 6:14. It says, "For sin shall not have dominion over you," and then it tells you why. It says, "For you are not under law, but under grace." In other words, Paul gives 2 reasons why sin will no longer rule over believers. He gives 2 reasons. Reason number 1, right? For sin shall not have dominion over you. So that's his emphatic statement. And then he gives you the 2 reasons why. Reason number 1, he says, is because you are no longer under law. Okay? In other words, when he says you are no longer under law, that means that God has removed something that contributed to sin's dominion. Do you see that? Think about it. Right? Sin is not going to have dominion over you anymore because you're not under the law. In other words, God has removed something, whatever under law means, he has removed something that contributed to sin's dominion. And because you're no longer under that, whatever it means, sin's not going to have dominion over you. And then there's reason number 2. Reason number 2, the second reason why sin is not going to have dominion over you anymore is because you're under grace. And so for reason number 2, God has provided something that enables victory over sin. And we know that it's God's grace that enables victory over sin. And so we're going to stick with these 2 right here. Our "for sin shall not have dominion over you" test, right? So now this is what I want you to look at. Since grace is presented as God's positive provision against sin's rule, it follows that under law must be referring to something whose removal also contributes to breaking sin's dominion. Okay? So in other words, the reason why sin is not going to have dominion over you anymore is because God's going to give you something, right? He's going to give you something, a positive provision, that's grace, against sin's rule, but he's also going to take away something. He's going to take away something that contributed to sin's dominion, okay? And that's the under law part, okay? And so what we want to do is we want to apply this test to the condemnation theory. Therefore, whatever Paul means by under law, it must be something that promotes, strengthens, or facilitates sin's rule over a person, right? See the logic there? All right, you see the logic there? He says you are no longer under law. That's going to rescue you from sin's dominion. So that means that whatever under law means, right? The whole idea is so that sin won't have dominion over us anymore. So he's telling us that this under law, whatever this under law means, it has something to do with promoting, strengthening, or facilitating sin's rule over you. That's why when he takes it away from you, you will have dominion over sin. Okay? So Let's do the test. Let's do the "for sin shall not have dominion over you" test on the condemnation ruling. Supposing under law simply means under law's condemnation. All right, then Romans 6:14 would read like this: sin will not have dominion over you, because you are no longer condemned. Or it would be sin shall no longer have dominion over you, because you're no longer under condemnation. But that explanation, right? Because that's what they're saying. Under law means under condemnation. That reading does not fit Paul's reasoning at all. Because when God wants to give you something to help you overcome sin and live righteously, that's the grace. That's what he gives you, for you're not under law, but grace. And so grace, it has power. It has power to empower your life so that you live holy and so that you overcome sin. Well, whatever under law means, when it's taken away, if you're able to not have sin have dominion over you anymore, that means that whatever got taken away was exercising some kind of power over you. Okay. Now, condemnation is a legal status. Condemnation is not a power at all. It's a legal status. It's not a causal influence. So in other words, what I'm saying is that whatever under law means, it is a causal influence. It's something causing, right? Just as grace is a causal influence. And the reason why both under law was something it was a causal influence, and the reason why under grace is a causal influence is because sin is a causal influence, right? Everyone has been born under sin. No one has overcome sin. It is a powerful force or power operating within the lives of people. And so therefore, condemnation is not a causal influence at all that produces sin, right? So being released from condemnation does not remove something that was making a person more prone to sin. I'll say that again. Think about it. Being released from condemnation, the condemnation of the law, does not remove something that was making a person prone to sin. Therefore, freedom from condemnation by itself does not explain why sin's dominion is broken, right? It's, like for instance, for me I know that I'm no longer under condemnation. All right, so I have that knowledge, but does that prevent me? Does that provide power, like real power to overcome real sin? It doesn't. Paul's arguments require more than the removal of a guilty verdict, okay? That's the beginning, and that opens the door for God's grace, etc. So the first reason, which not under law, the first reason being under the law must describe the removal of something that actually contributed to sin. Okay, because once you remove it, it's going to help you for sin not to have dominion over you. Just as the second reason, being under grace, describes the provision of something that actually enables righteousness. So Paul's logic is simply this. In order so that sin will not have dominion over you, God says, I'm going to do two things. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove one cause of sin's dominion. And that's what he means by you not being under law anymore. So under law, it means in some kind of way, whatever it means the removal of something that's causing sin's division. And number two, he's going to provide another cause, grace, right? That will do two things. That'll help you overcome sin and help you walk in righteousness. And because Adonai does those two things, he removes something within you that was helping sin's dominion, and he gives you something to help you overcome sin's dominion. That's the reason why sin will no longer reign in you. And that, my friends, is the reason why, if you interpret under law as under condemnation, If you interpret it that way, the condemnation is not. If when he says you are no longer under condemnation, that is not the removal of a cause of sin's dominion. Okay? It is not the removal of a cause of sin's dominion. So I hope you enjoyed that. Come back for parts 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Shalom in the name of Yeshua. And may Adonai open your eyes to behold wondrous things from his Torah. Hallelujah. Amen.